Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly with the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Modeling Social Factors in Onshore Wind Energy Expansion. We are grateful to our distinguished speakers for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website at iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar to read and answer them. And now I'd like to introduce you to Oliver Ronau, the person who has organized this session for us.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks to IAE for hosting us, and thanks to all the participants who are joining us to discuss modeling social factors in energy system models. I've initiated this and I'm improvising a bit because we're still waiting for our moderator, but I'm very happy to do so. And I'm very happy that we gathered here with Jan Weinand and Diana Süßer, who have followed my invitation to discuss this. Actually, it's based on some work we have been recently doing on including social factors in energy system models. And we will actually start right away with the first presentation by Diana on more broadly setting the scene on how to integrate social factors in energy system models, because before we then move into more specific aspects of onshore wind energy. So Diana is a senior expert in energy policies and transition expert at the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policies, and her research focuses exactly on that, modeling social and political aspects in energy models. With that, I'm handing over to you, and I'm looking forward to your input, Diana.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Oliver. I'm glad to be here. I'm sharing my screen right now. So yes, I'm going to talk a bit more broadly about why energy models should actually integrate social factors, but not only social, but also environmental factors, in fact. So as we all know, the European Union has very big and ambitious climate goals. And this is not only like a technological issue, that can be resolved simply by, technology fixes, but it's beyond also really a journey, a transition where all the people have been taken towards. And that's why we often talk about it's really about a clean transition and a transition for everyone. So really to be inclusive in the transition as well. And that's, of course, like a big challenge. So how do we actually reach such a climate neutral energy system in the European Union? And yeah, to figure that out, in fact, there are energy models. So those energy models are really there to inform specific policymakers about the different options we are having. So you can really think about computer-based models as so-called virtual laboratories that allow really thought experiments to explore the different decarbonization options and the implications, of course, that come actually with each option. And the good news is that there is a diversity of options to reach a climate neutral energy system. So it's not kind of only one solution we can find here, but there are different ways how we can do it. And this, of course, means that we choose like different technologies that will have also different implications on the society, but also our environmental systems. Models like those energy modeling tools, they have become increasingly powerful. So they really have, in fact, an impact on policymaking. So policymakers at EU level, but also at the national levels, really rely on those models and they use them to actually make decisions about the energy transition. But those models also have been criticized for actually largely ignoring social and environmental aspects, So when you think of those models, they are really technology-centric, considering sometimes also techno-economic aspects, but often when it really comes to rather social issues, considering preferences of the people for certain technologies, considering really the impacts of employment, there are a lot of lacks in those modeling tools. And for this reason, actually, we had a closer look in the study. What is actually the effect if we omit social and environmental aspects in modeling? So we explored in a recent study here in energy research and social science, the different impacts of ignoring the factors, but actually really comparing the modeling results to model user needs and really the real world observations. And I would like to share with you some of the results we got from the study. One example actually we looked into was in fact onshore wind power. And since that's the focus of today, I'm gonna start with that example from Germany. So yeah, Germany might be quite well known also for starting off with the Energiewende quite early on. But in fact, if you look like in the development over the last 10 years, there really has been a stagnation. So there really was some headwind for the further development of onshore wind power in Germany. Here in this graphic, you can always see the gigawatt installed of onshore wind specifically for Germany. So here you can see the development over the last 10 years. If with the last Renewable Energy Act, there were actually some targets how this should proceed. And we have extrapolated some data here for 2045. So you already see, okay, it may be more or less continues with the development we see today. But as you may have known, there was a governmental change in Germany last year, and now we have kind of more ambitious targets. So now there is really the government has understood we have been too slow with the development of renewable energy. So they have really pushed forward for stronger renewable energy targets. And this basically means that now we need to build like 10 gigawatt per year. So it's really like a steep increase if you compare it with the developments we have seen over the last years. And we also had a look into the study and compared it. Okay, like, is this really possible? Can we actually go that fast? And what do actually the models say? So what do energy models say? So there has been a study actually by Fraunhofer and ESA, really looking into different ways to decarbonize the energy system in Germany. And they also modeled an unacceptance scenario, which is very interesting. So they said, like, if people really don't want wind, if they really say we don't like it, then we're gonna reach like, very, very low numbers. But it also showed like 3 scenarios that are a little bit more optimistic, if you want to say so. But even there, you can see none of them actually modeled that high, like, such a high development as we have with the current targets, which really underlines that it's very, very ambitious. What Germany is planning at the moment, and which will eventually mean that we need a lot of social support actually to reach those targets. We also know that, of course, wind might not blow like all equally. So with it, there comes always also the big question about the electricity grid developments, the electrification across the European Union. So we also had a closer look into the developments here, which I think are also kind of very interesting. So when we look into different models and what they say, they often say, really, we need to expand the grids, right? We need to renew some grids because they're getting old, but also we need more of them, like to be able to really, deal with the electrification we have started across Europe. So we need to have more power that gets transmitted across the borders. So there are studies saying, okay, maybe we need to, for a cost optimal way, we might need to expand 5 times as of today, but there are others saying maybe 2 times the present transmission grid. But I mean, what do we see from this is nevertheless, we need new transmission lines. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And when you look into the policies, so also at the EU level, they have really understood that the power sectors shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewables really require significant investments in transmission and distribution systems. So that's kind of really high also on the EU agenda. And there is always the so-called 10 years transmission development plans, specifically consider, where these investments have to be taken place. And if you look at this investments and the progress, you know, towards those investments, then we see actually in reality that only 40% of the projects are actually on or ahead of schedule. We have quite a number of projects that are actually delayed, around 17%. Others have been also rescheduled. And among the reasons is social resistance for the transmission lines, but also longer permission procedures. So there are different reasons, maybe also environmental concerns that really are brought up here by the local residents, and therefore they don't support those developments, which is like, again, a very critical issue. So if you just think about it, okay, let's put the transmission lines, no problem. Well, you have to, it's maybe technological might be even like easy, but nevertheless, you have to really take into account that, of course, those transmission lines actually lead across the countries, along villages, and so on and so forth. So it needs to be also well communicated why those developments are actually necessary for the energy transition. So yeah, these are kind of two examples we kind of studied, which I think are quite interesting. So would like to hear your feedback. But we also have worked in our past project, the so-called Sentinel Sustainable Energy Transition Laboratory project, a bit on how we can now address, you know, those social aspects better. And for this, we actually have developed a modeling toolbox, Codian, which develops kind of some novel social storylines. You can think of them really as narratives for the social developments in the energy transition, and really considering also different dynamics. So we have kind of three ways we can say who is in the driving seat, you know, of the transition. Is it really like kind of the people? Is it like the grassroots initiatives? Is it the market? So will we all leave it to the cheapest, the cost-effective solutions? Or is it rather the governments really putting into place laws and driving the transition? And then we have not only done like this qualitative analysis, but really advanced also the quantitative social parameters to assist really the storylines, because as we know, models kind of need some ways of quantifications. So that's kind of the first approach we have taken here. And what we also did was really to use the outputs, the storylines and the quantifications we developed, and put them really into the energy modeling tool. So linking kind of is one way really to expand the limitations of current modeling tools, to, for example, link the technical model your calliope with our social storylines, like feeding them in and seeing how does it actually change the configurations of the future energy system. And then, of course, this can be also done further to do some more economic analysis, considering really welfare, public budget, but also to see what is the impact, environmental impact of those different ways. So yeah, I will leave it here just as a takeaway. I think what I wanted to really show you here is that considering social environmental impacts in modeling are important, because otherwise models really risk generating overly optimistic and potentially even misleading results by really neglecting social but also environmental factors. For example, if you think that maybe we suggest transitions that exceed every speeds we have yet ever perceived, you know, we go much faster than what has been perceived before, which might be quite unrealistic that we can go that fast. Or we have maybe pathways that really face hard to overcome, for example, land use conflicts, when it comes, for example, to conflicts between energy production and food production. So thank you so much. That was my input for this. So thanks everyone, and looking forward. I think if you have quick questions, you can also raise them now. But oh, I see Cristina is also here. Great. Cristina has been involved in the study I just presented and has also specifically worked in Sentinel on the environmental modeling part. So yeah, great to have her here as a moderator today. So I would give to you, Cristina, if you want.
Thank you, Diana. I apologize, but Zoom sometimes makes our life harder and easier. Sometimes it makes it harder. So hi, everyone. I don't want to interrupt the flow. So I'm just going to take a few comments or clarifying questions for Diana, if anyone has one. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands for that, or write them in the chat if you like. Actually, please use the question and answers rather than the chat. Okay.
But I don't see some questions.
I don't see
now,
any,
so,
that's why, yeah.
but good to mention this again. Please, to the audience, feel free to add something there.
I'm not hearing any, or I'm not seeing any. So thank you, Diana. So I'll give the floor to the next speaker, and please stay tuned because we will open some time for discussions later on. And I think that's going to be really interesting.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm the next speaker. So hello, everyone. I'm Jan Weinand. I'm working at the Institute of Techno-Economic Systems Analysis in Jülich. And I am the head of the group Complex Energy System Models and Data Structures there. And today my presentation will be on the historic drivers of onshore wind power siting in Europe. And after that, I will also show you some optimizations for the future onshore wind expansion, especially in Germany. And I think Diana already perfectly introduced the topic. That we need further criteria beyond cost or techno-economic assessments because the onshore wind deployment in Europe has stagnated in the last years, especially in countries like Germany. And expert groups have identified 4 key factors in the past for onshore wind deployment. The first one is socially mediated health concerns, which could be distributed regionally, so the burdens could be distributed. And this factor could be measured by disamenities, for example. Disamenities arise through negative externalities like noise or decrease in property prices. And what we did is that we took the existing or potential turbines and then created buffers around these and intersected the buffers with the living close by living inhabitants. Another measure could be regional equality. Here we located the turbines most equally among different regions in a country. And the second factor could be the distribution of financial benefits, because this leads to job creation and economic benefits. This we measured by costs. Here we took the turbine LCOEs, which are calculated by dividing the annual discounted costs by the annual discounted energy yield, or we could also use regional equality for this. The third factor, meaningful engagement, is important because local stakeholders increasingly oppose onshore wind, especially if they are not involved in the planning process. But this factor is very hard to quantify, and for us it was not possible yet to quantify this on a larger scale or even a national scale. And then one of the most important factors is the treatment of landscape concerns, because visual impacts on landscapes are one of the main reasons for oppositions, and especially in landscapes with high aesthetic quality or scenicness. And this could be measured by landscape quality ratings, which are available for a few countries in Europe, for example, Great Britain and Germany. Now I would like to give you some first information on the historic siting in Europe. Here I show you the exploited potential in Europe. And on the y-axis in this figure, you can see the LCOEs of the turbine locations in 2050 over the different countries in Europe. And what you see with the blue bubbles is the technical potential for onshore wind in these countries. So what could be maximally installed in the countries for specific LCOE ranges. And the bubble size indicates then the capacity. And what you see there with the red bubbles is how much of this potential is already exploited by existing turbines. And if a number is indicated here, it's indicated for exploitation shares above 5%. And we have about 120,000 turbines in Europe yet, which is only 2% of the potential which is exploited by these. And what you can also see is that the exploitation shares decrease with increasing LCOEs. So costs were as Diana already introduced, one of the most important factors. Then we see large exploitation shares in some countries like Germany and Denmark. And here we have relatively low onshore wind potential because of high population densities. And yeah, the potential is already exploited by high yeah, exploitation shares. And then there, on the other hand, are also countries like Finland, Ireland, Norway, or Sweden, which have a large cost-effective potential, but here we only see very low exploitation shares. We used the criteria I showed on the first slide to plan the future expansion in Germany for an expansion of 50 gigawatt. And you see this for 4 different scenarios here. In one, we minimized LCOEs. In one, the landscape impact, therefore we use scenicness ratings. In one, we minimize the disamenities, and in the last, we maximize the regional equality. And here in this first map, you see the existing turbines, how they are distributed in Germany. And we calculated the mean values at these existing locations. So in 2050, the LCOEs would be about 6.5 euro cent per kilowatt hour on average. The turbines would affect on average 1,400 people in a 2-kilometer radius, and the scenicness of the turbine locations would be 4.5 on average, with 1 being low scenicness and 9 being a high scenicness. And the regional equality of the turbines on NUTS 3 level in Germany is also quite low, with 25%. What we saw in all scenarios was that mostly all criteria were improved compared to the existing turbines. And if we minimize LCOEs, most turbines would be placed in the north of Germany because we have the best wind conditions there. And the LCOEs would be about 30% lower than when we compare this to existing turbines. In Germany, there's also a weaker trade-off between costs and scenicness, and therefore we see also in the minimum scenicness scenario that most turbines are placed in the north of Germany. When we minimize the disamenities, we can minimize it to 200 affected people or inhabitants at maximum. But this would imply 60% higher turbine LCOEs than in the minimum LCOE scenario. And to reach higher regional equality, this would mean that all other criteria are worsened. And the maximum equality we could reach in Germany with a 50 gigawatt expansion would be about 40%. But this is also needed to achieve some subordinate policy targets like the South quota in Germany. Yeah, now I showed you only turbine siting, but this neglects the network integration. And I would also like to show you the impact of this on this slide, because we did some further regional analyses where we optimized the turbine locations and the network connection. So in this figure here on top, you see in red about 60 potential wind turbines which could be installed, and in blue the substations where they could be connected to, and the background colors in black and gray show the scenicness ratings from 1 to 9. And yeah, here on the bottom you see the results. On the one hand, in the first row for the minimum cost scenarios, in the second row for the minimum scenicness scenarios. And now I would like to start talking about this first column, because here we took the turbine locations over from the scenarios on the previous slide, so from the national analyses. So the turbine locations here in dark blue were fixed, and then we connected them with a cost optimization here with electricity grid lines to a substation. We did this here for minimizing scenicness. And in the right column, you see the result when we optimize wind turbine locations and network integration simultaneously. What is interesting is that it shows that the simultaneous approach would lead to about 20% lower costs and about 40% higher lower landscape impact. This only applies to this region, but I think this is generalizable, and so future studies need to simultaneously optimize the siting and network integration. So I showed 4 key factors that could be used beyond the usually technical criteria. Some of them can be quantified, but unfortunately not all of them are easily quantifiable. And for landscape quality ratings, there are some data for some countries, but there are more studies needed for further countries. Then there are strong disparities among countries in historical onshore wind deployment, and the future expansion scenarios also showed strong trade-offs. We could achieve significantly better locations when we compare this with the existing locations, but it's questionable if the expansion scenarios are feasible. And for the future, we need some criteria weighting, also multi-objective approaches. We use turbine LCOEs to site the turbines, but in the future, we need to consider system LCOEs, where network integration is a part of, which I showed on the last slide. And what we realized is that wind expansion targets cannot be achieved by these siting decisions alone, but we need also procedural and financial participation. At this point, I would like to thank all my co-authors which were involved in the studies, and I would also like to thank the whole IK3, so my colleagues there, and yeah, thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Jan. I see that there are a couple of questions. I see one for Diana, but I think it's more into discussion that we can take later. But I see a couple of questions for you. I think they are clarifications. One of them is from Thorsten. He asked where you got the loss distributions for different regions.
I think the LCOEs are meant. Yeah, we intersected the locations of the existing turbines with our potential. So we had potential turbines with future turbine designs for 2050, and then we assumed that these locations of the potential turbines in 2050, which are intersected with the existing ones, are also used in the future. And like this, we received the LCOEs for 2050 at the existing locations.
And there is also related questions, and I maybe answer that, but this, how do you take into consideration subsidies in the 2050 LCOE calculation?
Yeah, we did not. So this is just not possible to assume how the regulatory framework will look like. So this is more of a macroeconomic perspective. Yeah.
Then there is a battery of questions. How do you value scenicness, and how does this vary on a national basis? How does valuation of a scene change with GDP, and how does it change with different approaches to local planning? And then there is a comment. We've seen different approaches to turbine seating in, say, Spain versus the UK versus Denmark. So there will seem to be cultural variations in acceptance, and that seems to be mediated by different factors.
Okay, yeah, if this is directed to me, I would totally agree with everything in this comment. And what I show you here, if you all still see my slides, is are the scenicness quality ratings for Great Britain and Germany. So these are available on a national scale and some kind of objective, but I agree with you on a regional level. This is very subjective how you would rate your hometown scenicness or the landscapes there. And the approaches they use for this is that they took representative photographs and then they are rated by a representative amount of people. And for example, in Great Britain, we have for every 1 kilometer square a rating of scenicness. And in Germany, they use reference spaces and then regression analysis. Yeah, for the different countries, I agree. I think it's different in every country, so it's hardly possible to have some generalizable results. Yeah, and how the valuation of a scene changes with GDP. I cannot answer this. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Then there is a last question. Where did you get future turbine technical details?
Okay, yeah, these were assumptions. I mean, this is, we took this from a study by Reiberg et al. And they calculated technically feasible turbines in 2050 with future turbine designs and investments. So this is based on assumptions. I mean, there are many studies who, based on expert opinions, assume how the turbines will look like in the future. And yeah, we took the turbines from there. They are open source, so everyone can use them. Yeah, but we used the same minimum distance restrictions for every country. So it's because we also do not know how this will look like in the future.
Thank you, Jan. I don't have any more clarifications, so I would like to give the floor now to Oliver, our last speaker. Please, Oliver.
Thank you, Cristina. I'm Oliver. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Hertie School, and I am presenting to you a paper, a short summary of a paper called Cost Potential Curves of Onshore Wind Energy, the Role of Disseminity Costs. So actually, now I can build on the previous talks, and we are basically taking one aspect, which Jan already mentioned, the disseminity costs, and trying to solve this trade-off, or do a first step towards solving this trade-off in a typical and integrating this and then solving it in a typical energy system model. And we are basically addressing the gap which Diana already mentioned between models where we see a substantial expansion of wind onshore at relatively low cost, and also that was visible in on your slide, Jan, with the pure engineering cost optimization that is very concentrated in high wind speed areas. And meanwhile, in the real world, the expansion is really slow in many places. Often this is attributed with local resistance. And here the question is, can we actually explain this in a model using this concept of disseminity costs? And what is then actually the trade-off between engineering and disseminity costs? So what are disseminity costs? So actually it's a monetarization of the perceived adverse effect of onshore wind energy on the local human population. And as it's perceived, it's a non-market good. It's hard to measure. There are different approaches to measure this. We have been looking here at the literature, so no own empirical study that we've done here. Looked at studies on hedonic prices, which have quite ambiguous results, and it's hard to operationalize because then it depends on the value of the properties, actually of the houses, and there getting some data there is really an issue. We have some choice experiments which actually ask the people how much would you be willing to pay or willing to accept as a monetary payment to accept a wind turbine in your backyard or close to your home. And then there's a third approach, a life satisfaction approach. And actually the choice experiments is always a relative value of moving further away or letting approach the wind turbines, whereas the life satisfaction approach is actually doing the trade-off between what is the equivalent income value of having a wind farm or not having this. And the choice experiments are stated preferences. Life satisfaction is it's also a bit stated how satisfied you are, but it's more empirical in the sense that then this is combined with empirical data on wind turbines and not really asking people for what is their perception of wind turbines. All in all, there's high uncertainty, and we wanted to pick this up in our modeling or in our valuation because we think it's good to have this as a step towards including this in model, but we should acknowledge that there is a huge uncertainty. So we have here defined an upper and lower case for this disseminity cost functions. Then we are deriving disseminity cost maps. I think that's similar to what Jan already showed. So we're starting with population data, then we're having 1, 2, 3, 4 kilometer radii where we apply the cost functions. We're combining this with engineering cost maps. Nothing fancy we're doing here, but we're building on something which which is fancy, but has already been done in other studies by our co-author Tim. And then we're placing turbines, actually also using an existing approach from Forschungszentrum Jülich, where we're then saying where can we place turbines, and then for each turbine we're basically adding up the costs, the disseminity costs, and the engineering costs. And that gives us as a result what we call cost potential curves. So how much wind can we expand at what marginal costs? And here you see the pure engineering costs, and then you can see the costs including some disseminity. And here again, that's the large uncertainty I've been just talking about between what actually are the costs of the monetarization of this perceived adverse effects of wind energy. And then you can see, well, it's actually quite a range that we see here, but all in all, it's not too high. So we see that here with the low parameterization of this disseminity costs only 4% here for the last turbine, which we have to spend additional costs, and we're comparing this here to the European reference scenario. So that's all turbine sites basically available in Germany. But even with the current reference scenario, which is not ready for climate neutrality, and also with like just taking twice the capacity to say, well, maybe we're a bit more, or we need to be more ambitious with wind onshore energy, then we are ending up in this range, which is colored here as a like high and low expansion scenario. And here you can see how much disseminity costs affect these cost curves. But what we can't see in this graph is actually that which turbines are chosen under the hood here, if we are including disseminity costs or not. That's changing quite a lot. So there's this trade-off actually between having the best sites and being concentrated at the most windy sites, or affecting population. And here, depending on whether we have low disseminity costs or high disseminity costs, we can reduce the exposure of people to wind turbines within their 1, 2, 3, or 4 kilometer distance. We can reduce that by 30 to 60%. Then we compare this, and it's getting a bit more political towards with setback distances. So saying up to now we allowed the turbines to be built as close as 200 meters to living areas, but we accounted for disseminity costs. So it's only built there if it's worth it in terms of in terms of social costs, adding up the engineering and the disseminity costs. And here now we compare this to a scenario where we need to have a minimum distance from homes of 1,000 meters. And then we see how the costs increase, because then we are unable to solve this trade-off between disseminity and engineering costs as efficiently as we otherwise would. And if we are only having these 1,000-meter setback differences, and then we're building at the best places, then we are actually back at a higher exposure of people to wind turbines. So only having setback differences, it's not so good. And maybe it's even good to make some exclusions to large setback differences if it's really worth it in terms of social costs. We also, and that's more of a preview of what's more in the paper, we also applied this. So far I showed the example of Germany. We also applied this to other European countries. And here you can see that, well, in Germany, the situation is somewhat tight comparable to France and Austria, if we're comparing the expansion scenarios to how many people are affected and what's the increase in the levelized cost of electricity due to accounting for disseminity costs. And if you're looking at Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, it's even more tight, the situation there. But in many other European countries, there's actually some space where we can, at relatively low costs, increase in engineering costs, or like accepting some disseminity costs, we can meet the EU reference scenario, or even exceed it by a factor of 2. So to discuss and conclude, and maybe also raise some points we can pick up in our joint discussion. So there's a high uncertainty regarding many factors here on the disseminity cost, and that's only one factor of all the social factors we could include and models. Of course, real-world expansion does not follow cost optimization. That's what Jan already said. Our analysis is more looking at the social costs. So we are agnostic of whether, well, actually, is there a regulatory mechanism, like a market mechanism to price disseminity costs as something which would otherwise be an externality. It's independent of whether people are actually compensated or not. It's just looking at the social costs and where should we place turbine to be better off as a society. But of course, then we have these political question of, for example, financial compensation or taxation, etc. And we assume, and that's also one drawback where we are then landing, is we're assuming disseminity costs only being dependent of people being affected themselves, but not how others are affected. So all this fairness and equity perception, which is, I think, driving acceptance, that's not included here in our approach, at least not yet. Well, so still, I would say, despite this large uncertainty, disseminity costs will not overall hold back the energy transition. We could build wind turbines at somewhat higher costs, and these somewhat higher costs are in the range of what is uncertainty in general. I mean, in the same order of magnitude of what is the uncertainty of costs associated with the energy transition more generally. But it could change how turbines are placed within countries, across countries, and the energy mix, and that's basically the next step. So we're also providing this as an open data set, so other people can use this in their energy models and address these next step questions. And still, we're looking at disseminity costs, so there are other factors which could be included to have a more broader view on what are the social costs of wind energy. And I'm stopping here and looking forward to questions and discussion.
Thank you, Oliver. I don't have any questions yet. Oh, there is one. Sorry, Gabriela. So Gabriela is asking, will all these nice research papers be posted, please?
Yeah, I think I can answer for all of us that the papers, at least one paper corresponding to each of our presentation, are included already in the invitation, in the announcement of the webinar, and we will, we can post our slides also via the IAE. I think we haven't. I don't know how you think about that, Jan and Diana, but at least for me, I can say, and you're nodding, so yes, we can post that.
Okay, thanks. So there is another question by Russell McKenna. What about existing turbines and parks? How did you deal with this in the analysis? And then a second part, I will have expected some interest effects when considering the change, for example, the number and capacity of turbines compared to existing installed stock. Through repowering.
I'm not sure if that's addressed also to all of us. For me, I can say it's really a greenfield approach, saying where could we place turbines. We are not considering for existing turbines, but I think it's different for you, Jan, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, it's so we also looked at existing turbines, and for as I said, okay, the question was for Oliver, because I think Russell.
I would be interested in how you dealt with existing turbines, actually.
Yeah, so we took these turbines over, and as I said, we intersected them with buffers with the existing turbine, with the potential turbines, and then we assumed that in 2050 there would be located the intersected potential turbines. And these turbines were assumed as already chosen and then subtracted from the overall potential.
Can I just have the freedom of asking a build-up question to that? Did you guys treat it like one type of wind turbine? I was wondering how your analysis will be different for smaller or for bigger types of turbines, if you have any insights about that.
Yeah, so if I may answer this, I think it's a good question, and we use a uniform turbine design, but especially when it comes to acceptance questions, I think larger or smaller turbines could have different effects, and I think also not only larger and smaller, but also the number of turbines. And what we noticed is, and I think that's also true for Oliver's analysis, is that if we go for the cost optimum, this might not be acceptable, but we also have the lowest turbine numbers, because if it's cost effective, these turbines will also generate the most electricity. And so in a way, this could also increase the acceptance, despite being a criterion that's not really focusing on acceptance.
Thank you. And I see Diana has her hand up.
Yes.
Do you wanna?
I have a question, actually. It's a bit of follow-up, like, to Oliver. Like, Oliver, I find it quite interesting that you said, like, when we consider the dissemination costs, right, we will likely go for the regions with less technical potential, so that, like, windmills are built in areas where we can produce less electricity. Did you also consider or check then, does it mean that we will need more land to actually build wind farms on? Because, you know, if we exclude certain areas with the high technical potential, we need maybe more land in areas with maybe a higher socio-technical potential, but in the end, you know, the land use impacts might be higher. Thank you.
Yes, good point. So we have gigawatts on our axis, and we discussed this, but we did not model this throughout. So if you and when we bit up the policy targets, which are in gigawatts, so it was also easy for us to align with the strategies. But of course, it depends on where you put the turbines, how many terawatt hours you have. And from the top of my head, I think these 15–20% or so of disseminity costs, that's or increase in social costs. If you're considering disseminity costs, 5% of this are actually engineering costs, meaning you need to build more turbines. So you can say, well, you have 5% more turbines to be built, but these are built where there are less people. So still it's a cost optimal way of getting to a gigawatt target, but it's not then feeding this back and solving this in terms of minimum terawatt hours. But that's, I mean, the idea is now we have this data set, we can include this in a cost optimization models where there are so many more factors to be considered, like grid expansion, etc. What was the earlier point we discussed with you, Jan? I had one thing to add.
Yeah, it was on the turbine design. I think in smaller and larger turbines, and also the number of
actually what's interesting there from the disseminity cost literature, there are some choice experiment asking, well, how are you affected? What are you willing to pay, willing to accept for another wind turbine being built or being added to the wind farm? So because actually it's a wind farm affecting the people, not a single turbine. And also what's the height of the turbines, but results on that are even more uncertain and even more ambiguous. So we refrained from including them. Also, it will be mathematically even more complicated if you say, well, the cost of one turbine depends on whether there's another turbine close by. Then gets really crazy. But we accounted for what's the average size of the wind farm when calculating our wind our disseminity costs. So we're not over exaggerating because we are treating every wind turbine as a single wind farm. No, we're not doing that, but we are basically assuming they are built in a couple of so many turbines. We looked this up from how large are wind farms in terms of number of wind turbines in the past. And maybe the last point is now turbines are much larger, but fewer on the same area. But again, it's very hard to monitorize. I mean, it's already hard to monitorize it, but then these changes, I feel that would maybe give us a sense of being overly precise, where we actually can't do that.
Thank you all. Diana, was that a hand?
Yes, I just wanted to add, I mean, like, yes, that's the challenge. And I want to add another component. It's even the regional differences, right? So we often cannot even assume that people think about technologies, about distances, like also the density of turbines, you know, the people feel affected the same way, even across one country, right? So even in Germany, we see big differences. So I think that's also something which I think is not considered in your studies yet, but I think it's something worth to kind of think about. Because we also know there is, of course, some also social learning in the sense, you know, once you know the wind turbines, then yeah, maybe you get also used to them, so you will accept them in the future. We have also generational issues, right? That younger people might be more open than older people. So there are a lot of factors also around culture, heritage, which are important when it comes to social aspects. I just wanted to add that aspect.
Actually, I would like to build on that, but let me just take one question from the audience. There is this question by Thorsten Weisskopf. He asked, are there assumptions on how to deal with the issue in an agendas-based, for example, operations-based approach? I think it's a general question, or is this, I don't know, it doesn't say, they don't say if it's for one of you, so I open it for all of you to comment on this. Let me repeat it. Are there assumptions on how to deal with the issue? Not sure about what issue is that, Thorsten, right now, in a operations-based, for example, approach? Or maybe you want to comment on that, Thorsten, and then we can narrow down the question. And then, yeah, sorry, Jan.
Maybe it could be clarified what the issue, what is meant by issue, and probably we can answer it.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let me ask this, Diana. I have a question that might be interesting for the broader audience, and is that when you were implementing the analysis with energy modelers for the quotidian toolbox, what were the main challenges that you saw that energy modeling has? And that is not only for wind energy, right? That is applied to all types of modeling. But what are the main challenges that we have to overcome in this case? No.
Thanks, Cristina. Yeah, it's indeed a very challenging one. But I mean, to summarize it, I think what we always really see that, of course, like issues like the energy transition, climate change, are really like, you know, complex problems. And we only can solve them if we work more interdisciplinary. So we really need to break out of our disciplinary boundaries. So not only modelers, you know, being modelers and doing the thing they can do, like from their maybe engineering background, but being really open to also talk to social scientists, to talk to political scientists, and understand maybe also better, you know, the factors that are actually relevant to be considered when we really talk about the energy transition, because it is really a socio-technical, if not even a socio-ecological technical, you know, transition we are really talking about. So I think interdisciplinarity is like something not everyone is used to, but I think it's a big win if modelers, but also social scientists are open, really looking for this exchange. And another point is, of course, transdisciplinarity. So being also open to get the voices of the stakeholders considered. So it's nice to have the models, but really to interact with different stakeholders, like with the decision makers, with the policy makers, being really open, you know, to talk about what can models do, but where are also the limitations of the modeling tools, that not actually decisions are based on, like, you know, simplistic results, which are really far from the reality. So I think these are kind of key challenges we are still facing. And I think it really needs, like, you know, this more like, you know, holistic approach in the sense of bringing really different people together to really solve these challenges.
Thank you, Diana. There is another question. Sorry, wrong spelling. Agent-based issue means the social factors we discussed today. How does it affect investment decisions? Is there ideas to model this? I understand to model how social factors affect investment decisions.
Maybe I can jump in here. Oh yeah, Oliver.
Okay. Maybe you can add. So for the so what we do is actually this more public policy or public economic perspective of minimizing social costs. But I actually like the idea of now taking this one step further. How can we make agents in the real world behave so we are reaching towards such a social optimum? And I think how to model this, I'm not so sure. Maybe you have something on that, Diana. But I think actually the reality is even more close to that many of our techno-economic optimization models are, because there are these regional planning procedures where they take into account the different factors. And it's not only wind speed, but it's are people living nearby? Is this a nature reservoir? And it's not 0-1 like binary decisions as we take them in our models when we exclude some areas, but it's much more nuanced. That's at least what I hear from people being involved in regional planning in Germany, and what I think partly we can see from the results of wind turbines being not only there where the wind blows the strongest.
Yes, I mean, maybe adding to this, generally agent-based modeling is, for me, I think it's super interesting. I have worked with this myself for quite a while, because you can really be able to really see the single individuals, right, in a modeling tool and really simulate their decision-making, which of course is crucial, right, for the energy transition. So investments have been made, there are different forms, individuals, collectives. So it's, I think, a very, interesting modeling approach. But we also see that most of the time it's still excluded, like they are really separate, you know, and there are now approaches, of course, also to link modern energy system modelings actually with the agent-based modelings, which is a great approach to do that, actually to get a better understanding also of the individuals and what drives their behaviors in a system, in our energy system. And you can also look in our studies. Actually, the study I presented, like the 2 case studies, we had also another case study from Greece, where we specifically looked also into domestic investment behavior for small-scale PV. And there we could also nicely see that actually the governments, again, you know, based decisions a bit on modeling results, but misinterpreted. So they basically, you know, people, like they put a nice feed-in tariff, then people starting investing, but they invested actually more than they expected. And then they, you know, got the whole thing drawn back and cut like a lot of funding, which led to a completely, like, you know, low down of the investments in small scale PV. And modeling also had like some misassumptions here, like you look for the optimal solutions, which were not met with the reality. So what the models kind of basically said was not what in the end happened, because the model doesn't know, right, how the individuals behave. So I think it's very interesting, and I think it can give some interesting implications also in the further developments. So I will post the link here again, and you can also specifically look for some studies, for example, with an agent-based model called Atom, which has been used in the Greek context, but also beyond.
Thank you. We have another question by Adrienne, but before that, let me just follow up on that idea that models cannot tell you everything, and linking with Oliver's statement about uncertainty. How do we deal with uncertainty in modeling in this case? What would you say? It is essential to do X when you are modeling because of the uncertainty. What would be that X?
Maybe I can start, but then please add to that. I think it's, if we know there's something like a social factor, like a disseminated cost, it's hard to quantify this. But then it's still better to have this in the model. That would be my first point here. And the second point is to show sensitivity ranges. And of course, the exact values, it's really hard to say, but when we have a range, then it's already good to indicate also to those that make decisions. Well, but it is a decision under uncertainty, as most decisions in life are. But here you see what is the uncertainty regarding the factors. And of course, it's not always possible to run sensitivities in all kinds of dimensions. But I think that's the way how we should approach this. But with many factors, we are already doing this. If we're focusing on one aspect, zooming in and then saying, well, that's the uncertainty, and we should do so even more, I think, for these highly uncertain social factors.
Yeah, I would agree with Oliver that I would also suggest to do some scenario analyses. And I mean, if we already in our analyses show that a factor like the disseminity cost will not have a high impact, then I think it's also not so important to include uncertainty. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me take this question. So Adrienne asked, does any of the models you use include impacts on biodiversity directly or indirectly? And they are thinking about Diana's comment on interdisciplinarity here.
Yeah, I would say we use the data set by Reiberg, and when they calculated the potentials, they also excluded nature conservation zones, for example. So there it's at least included indirectly. I know there are some approaches who do this directly, but yeah. So it's also possible to focus on specific bird species and include this directly.
Yeah, maybe jumping in at the end, you might want to have a look at the ENBIOS model that we also developed in the Sentinel project at UAB, which is actually specifically an environmental assessment module to assess energy modeling. Okay, I'm taking more questions from the audience. You're very welcome. But I have another question. Let me just come back. This is for all three of you. How do you think policymaking would be different if social aspects and maybe other environmental aspects played a more prominent role in wind energy deployment? Do you think it will change? What changes would you expect to see? What is the added value of including these social aspects?
Yeah, if I may start, I would say we already see some changes. For example, in Germany, we have this this policy that every federal state needs to use 2% of its area for onshore wind in the future. And for example, in Bavaria, they distribute this among the counties, so the NUTS 3 areas. And this would be exactly what we try to model with this regional equality. So just a regional distribution, a distribution of burdens, but also of opportunities. And so I think the policymakers, or hopefully they increasingly realize that it's needed. And yeah. So I think, or I hope in the next years, we will be on the right direction.
Yeah, I can echo that, and maybe to add, I mean, the wish would be, of course, that it's kind of a more like a just transition, which is also be more inclusive. So to really reflect critical also how everyone can be really part of the transition. I mean, we have this nice frame, right? Clean energy for all. And then other things from the energy union perspective to really get people on board to be not only like, you know, the consumers, but also getting more and more the producers of energy, which offers huge potentials. But of course, there needs to be specific policies that actually enable participation of the wider population. And I think this really needs specifically socially sensitive policies to really enable that. And hopefully we will also get it like across the EU. I mean, there we see big differences, right? I mean, there are many models from cooperatives, to community approaches, and hopefully this will be like something that we will see much more to, see not only how to distribute it, but also to get more participation from the public in the whole process. That's what I wish for, and that there is also growing awareness that this is important for the acceptance, not only, but also, for the ownership and being part of the transition.
Thank you all. So we are already past 5. I just wanted to ask the audience if there are any more questions or comments or any matters they would like to discuss? I don't see any. So I would like to thank you all for attending today, and also the panelists. Let me just make a little bit of a disclaimer, because there is very recently we started projects of the call on wind energy in the natural and social environment. There are 3 sibling projects. One of them is just Wind for All. Another one is called Wendy. Another one is called WIMBY, that I think might be of interest for the audience. We can leave the references here. And I'm gonna pass the word back to Rebecca, please. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
IAEE wishes to thank Cristina Madrid-López and our speakers for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.